Thank you very much, Vikram. Always a pleasure and a delight. I think I've done more Brookings programs than any other institution since I became a minister, but each one of them has been very interesting, very educative, very informative. And I must thank you for all the concern you have, particularly for the energy sector and overall for the development and growth of India. Thank you, Upendraji, for being here. Privileged to have you, sir, Dr. Kirit Parekh, one of the most illustrious economists India has had in several years. Congratulations, Rahul. Very, very good effort. In fact, I've been scanning through the book, and it does open my eyes to a lot of aspects of this subject which I have not yet probably appreciated as well as I should have. And I'm wondering where you were all these months. I will need to engage more with you, understand a lot more. My compliments also to all your co-authors for all the work they've put in. Thank you, Dr. Gokran. Thank you, Dr. Sidhu. My good friend Sumant has chosen to sit on the last row. I don't know why. Usually you do that if you're in school as a truant boy or when you want to walk out of the program quietly before it ends.
But he's worried you might comment on his paper.
Varsha, my joint secretary of the department, is here. I see a lot of young, enthusiastic research colleagues of yours today, and a very distinguished audience, very concerned about this very important subject. Thank you for coming on such a foggy day. But I must start by apologizing. He's not responsible for the delay. I am. I did not know that I should have factored in that in my early morning walk, I'll meet somebody who will take away half an hour of my walking time in a conversation which I could not avoid. So my real sincere apologies for being a little late. But a very interesting book from what I see you have covered. In a manner of speaking, it has brought to light, and as you very rightly put in, different aspects which could have two sides of the subject. Every issue has been very well brought out. I particularly liked your point. Solar energy could be half the price or it could be 2.5 times. It's really a question of how you look at life cycle costs, how you look at your energy security aspect, how you're going to look at your concerns for environment and climate change. And sadly, and probably because of the harsh reality of India still being a developing country, India has not been able to truly factor in the long-term costs of the kind of energy that we are consuming day in and day out. And in that sense, this document will open our minds to factor in some aspects of energy pricing, which over the years have probably not found the right amount of traction or appreciation by policymakers, and more than policymakers, I would think by the public at large. You will appreciate India is a very price-sensitive country. So I think pricing is a very sensitive subject for India. People have sensitivities because of their own compulsions. It's not as if we in India can easily pass the buck on to the people and say, look, you got to pay today a higher price for a better tomorrow. And in fact, on many occasions, I have told my colleagues in the renewable energy space that we'll have to look at investment returns over the life cycle of the project, rather than having a scale which tries to recover costs first and promises a cheaper power in the future. Could we turn the equation and look at cheaper power today, make it more economically viable and sustainable for the buyer to take, and let the price gradually escalate to remain within grid parity? So we've been grappling with a lot of different ideas, different thoughts, and this compendium will certainly help us look at the subject a little more differently than what we have in the past. So in that sense, I must compliment all of you for flagging off these various issues. I truly believe that renewables is an idea whose time has come. We've had this ministry, and I found this out only recently, for over 25 years?
32 years.
Oh, Jesus. 32 years, he tells me. 32-year-old ministry, we are at 2,900 megawatt of solar. We've done better on the wind space, about 22,000 megawatts. We have a little bit of waste to energy and biomass and bioenergy and stuff like that. But overall, still about 32,000 megawatt of installed capacity. Of course, when we look at it in terms of the units generated and consumed, as you rightly pointed out, it's under 6%. Prime Minister Modi has been very passionate about this subject. And I'm not politicizing the issue, but one particular aspect of Mr. Modi that I'm sure many of you have been observing, and I'm experiencing it firsthand, is that he does not believe in platitudes, or he does not believe in ideas which take years and years to fructify. If something is needed, it is needed to be done, and it's needed to be done now. In fact, I often quote that book Al Gore, Vice President Al Gore, had written about the inconvenient truth, which was an eye-opener for large parts of the world and for us to understand the serious impact of on the environment of climate change. And a few months after that, I think Prime Minister Modi came out with his version of the subject, which was convenient action. And the truth is well known, but ultimately what is the action we are doing about it? And in that sense, when we came into government and found that India was pitching for a growth story where solar would go up to 20 gigs by 2022, wind was almost at a collapse stage because of certain fiscal incentives having been withdrawn, had come to a stage where from 6,000 megawatts, they were hardly doing 2,000 megawatts a year. And most manufacturing in wind was completely at a standstill. Solar manufacturers themselves were under severe stress. We realized that the rules of the game needed to be rewritten. And that's where, with the very, very enthusiastic support and action by Mr. Upendra Tripathi, we have another joint secretary who's Varsha's colleague, Tarun Kapoor. This whole team, we had a gentleman, Alok Srivastava, who has just gone promoted as additional secretary in shipping now. This team, I tell you, is a completely supercharged team. If I suggest a action, they go 2 steps for every suggestion. And in that sense, we've been able to rewrite the story to plan for 100 gigs instead of 20. To look at getting back traction in the wind sector. We're looking at what can we do in terms of R&D for all the problems that we are facing. This book is very rightly pointed out that ultimately storage is going to be a very, very essential aspect to make renewable a success, particularly since it does not come in India's peak hours, maybe 7 o'clock in the evening. There's no solar, there's very little wind at that point of time. But storage is a subject which still under a lot of study. In fact, a small aside, about a month before the election got over, somewhere around March or April, a person who's in the renewable energy field came up to me, or rather just called me and talked about storage. And I was trying to fob him off. I had too many election-oriented works. But something caught my imagination, and when he spoke about storage, I said, this sounds interesting. And energy is really not my field at all. Didn't know P of power or E of energy before I became a minister. But I don't know why, but I gave him an appointment. He wanted to introduce the Samsung people to me. And he was there, by the way, yesterday in your conference. And I gave him an appointment. He came with the whole team from Samsung. I was quite excited and intrigued about the storage possibilities. Of course, sadly, they were not able to address any of my questions or concerns, so I flagged off 10 issues and they left. But I never for the life of me knew that 45 days after that, I would have to start opening the subject again and talking to him again about storage. But truly, I believe that that's a very, very critical element of the renewable story going forward. And when we came in, there was one pilot being worked on to study the storage processes. We've already expanded that to 6. 6 pilots are now going on to see what we can do with better and more storage and how quickly can we get low-cost storage into the system. Of course, another very, very interesting piece of information came from Dr. Kakotkar when he highlighted to me the a proposal. He has been working with the ministry for the last 2.5 years to do research on solar thermal. That also is a very valuable input. If we can make that a success, it can change the rules of the game, particularly for off-grid or microgrid stations where we can provide 24/7 power without storage. And he said it's just languishing. And I think it was either in India Habitat Center or here. We just concluded another research project discussion, and at lunch he mentioned it. I said, so why is it taking so long? He says, we need 200 crores and nobody is willing to fund it. And I called up the NTPC chairman from lunch. I told him I'm sending Dr. Kakotkar, and Dr. Kakotkar I can trust with my eyes closed. I don't even need to know what the project is about. And I said, let's just go ahead. IIT Jodhpur is willing to partner the initiative. And in half an hour, we had approved a 200 crore R&D project with IIT Jodhpur. And now I think we are on their back to push it faster. It's the reverse story. But we are very keen that that happens. If we can make that happen, we once again rewrite a lot of your chapters over here. Right? So similarly, net metering. Now this is something which is happening. We've already started allowing, and some 9 or 11 states have allowed net metering to happen. But there are certain very typical problems. On the face of it, sounds very nice and exciting. But the reality is that the power that comes in the daytime, when the person is not at home or when the person is not consuming lights and stuff like that, he gives it to the grid at very expensive rates. And at that time, power otherwise there's very little demand. And I can't shut on and off a coal station at my whim and fancy. So we are grappling with certain very typical issues to encourage rooftop and make net metering a reality. But I'm sure we'll come around, we'll have to get DISCOMs on board, and that's where we will have to get the nation to pay the price or to appreciate that some sort of sacrifice is good for the long run. Because ultimately that will get loaded onto tariffs if that were to happen. But at the same time, a nation where a lot of consumers have to cross-subsidize and pay very high tariffs or alternately use diesel generating sets, I'm sure we'll be able to and will be happy to accept this as a step forward in making India more energy secure. Similarly, on the transmission and distribution side, you very rightly have pointed out in your book that that's the most critical, essential item to make this field successful. At 19-20% PLFs for solar, at 25-26 for wind, certainly the cost of transmission escalates very significantly. And I remember in one of the cabinet meetings when this issue came up, Mr. Modi immediately shot back, then you have to have wind and solar working together. You have to see whether we can expand more of the renewables around coal-based stations, if you can get barren land or wastelands. Can you look at the coal mines or the abandoned mines as potential solar bases? So in that sense, one very great advantage I have is his own passion, Prime Minister Modi's own passion for this subject, and his own ability to think innovatively, which helps us also in our work. We already got the coal industry looking at these abandoned mines and seeing if we can expand solar outputs there. In many cases, looking at small coal-based, reject-based plants coming up. So we could have a combo which can feed the local area. In the recent Jharkhand elections, when I was campaigning in Jharkhand, one stark reality which hit me very hard was that Jharkhand provides the raw material and fuel to provide electricity for the whole country. We here are probably enjoying some electricity coming out of a raw material which came out of Jharkhand. But the people of Jharkhand are deprived of electricity. And I have in fact, soon after the new chief minister took over, he met me 2 days after that. And I said the first task is we have to get every person living in Jharkhand 24/7 power, whatever it may take. And yesterday, in fact, while I was sorting out the union meeting, my secretary was in Jharkhand along with the NTPC officials. They have 2 large plants in Jharkhand which are operating at 5% of their capacity. Patratu makes 40 megawatts in a 850 or 900 or 1000 megawatt plant. and for years on end. That's the story. So we've already got down cracking, cut to the chase, get that sorted out. I've already talked to the BHEL chairman. And then whether we can have renewables come around that and make it cheaper to transmit and distribute. So all of these are issues which I found mentioned in very effective manner in this book. They will help us in our working for off-grid solutions to reach power to the people. We have a plan to green all the islands, Andaman and Nicobar, Lakshadweep. They're all running on diesel generator sets. Apart from being expensive, it completely messes around with the beautiful environment there. So we are looking at trying to convert these islands into green islands. There is a lot of talk of waste to energy, but I don't think we still have a viable solution in that, which is environmentally acceptable, which is safe, which, considering India's own difficulty in segregating waste, is technically possible. So all of these are issues which we are struggling with. We have had certain good initiatives that Secretary Tripathi has taken. He's brought in a great thrust to the Make in India solar program. He's giving preferential treatment to the domestic manufacturers to help them grow in size, scale, technology. We have defense now joining, partnering our effort to turn around all their diesel generation at the borders and in the ordnance factory by solar energy, at least in the daytime. If we can dovetail storage with that, it will be wonderful. I'll put in solar across the Indian border. And if I can get a little bit of storage coming in there, it will be one of the most satisfying things I would do as a minister. And I would urge any of you here who can add value to our struggle and search for an effective storage solution to please do come forward and help us in our efforts. You have raised some very valid points about grid security. And another challenge which I'm facing about renewables is the concerns that states have expressed in terms of their ability to manage the grid effectively. I'm trying to bump up the renewable share from 6 to 15%. And you can imagine it's not easy. Dr. Parekh has made certain projections about growth in demand. Sir, I would beg to join issue on that. I believe that's very conservative. India as a nation still has 30 crore people starved without even an electricity connection. They're just deprived of electricity. We have a lot of places, and rather beyond Mumbai, Delhi, most parts of India, except privileged constituencies of certain very senior leaders maybe, which don't get electricity round the clock. There are large amounts of industries still running on diesel generator sets. There's a huge thrust being given to the Make in India program to manufacture in India. All of that will need a disproportionate growth in the electricity sector. So personally, my target, very different from what you have projected, is that the 1 trillion units that we are producing today has to go up to 2 trillion by the time I go back to the people of India for my re-election in 2019. So I'm working personally on that target. Within that 2 trillion, I do hope to see renewable contributing 15%. End of the day, there may be a little slippage here and there. I was telling the coal unions yesterday, we've set a very ambitious target of 10% growth for coal production. Last 4-5 years, it's done 1.5%. My overall target for next 5 years is an 18% CAGR. So this year we set 10%. And all the pink papers have reported, not that we've achieved 7.5% against 1.5% last year, but we've fallen short by 3%. So sometimes making ambitious targets has its own pitfalls, but I don't mind taking that. I'm happy to take the challenge of aggressive targets, and I really believe that unless we think big, nothing can be achieved. And our common friend is testimony to that, certainly. I think the time has come for India to give that renewed thrust to the renewable energy space. I would look for support and guidance, Vikramji, from you, from your colleagues, from your very esteemed institution. And I can assure you of a completely open mind, willing to learn from you and your colleagues and your research and experiences. I'm willing to work through the system to get the fiscal benefits that are essential to make this happen. The only thing I'm unable to do is provide subsidies. I believe any business that is subsidy driven can only achieve 2,900 megawatts after 32 years. But a business which stands on its own feet, on its own merit, can achieve 100 gigs in 5 years. Thank you very much.